Who are the players that could carry your team to a win in the fantasy playoffs? It's time to give you our boom picks for this week. First, let me remind you, this is a great time to try Underdog Fantasy. If you haven't yet, you get to take advantage of this week's new customer special. Austin Eckler just needs 1 yard. Take the higher on that pick, combine it with any other pick that you like, and you can win your very first entry. Just make sure when you sign up for Underdog, use promo code ENDGAME because you also get a 100% deposit match up to $100 just for trying it out. All right, but let's get to the players. Who's the first guy that you think could have huge upside in week 15?
I love Chris Olave this week. I think he's going to have a huge game and help teams advance to week 16. I know we didn't have a big week 14 game, but that was against the Panthers. The Panthers play extremely slow, low scoring, boring games. They didn't need to throw the ball a ton. Now they're back at home against the Giants. And I know the Giants defense has been a little bit better and they weren't terrible against the Packers, but they're still bottom 10 against wide receivers. They give up a ton of points to wide receivers. And prior to this week 14 game, Chris Olave had at least 94 yards in 3 straight games, had gone over 100 yards in each of the last 2 games. I think he bounces back in a big way this week against this New York Giants defense at home. Look, they still don't have anybody else to throw to here, right? Michael Thomas still out. Rashid Shaheed, who knows? Juwan Johnson isn't cutting it. Chris Olave, clearly the only guy, the best guy they have to throw to. He's got big play upside. They're at home. I'm not scared of this Giants matchup whatsoever. I think Chris Olave bounces back in a big way with a huge game in week 15.
Now, when it comes to playoff time, a lot of people like to say you start your studs no matter what. It's not that simple, which is why we do our live streams. We give you all these videos and tell you who you really should start. There is one guy who I pretty much start no matter what, and that's Derrick Henry, because he's Derrick Henry. Well, I'll tell you what, it's been a very pronounced split for him throughout the season of home and road, and that's just the whole Titans team. Until they're very unlikely and kind of stunning come from behind victory on Monday night, the Titans just could not win on the road, and they weren't putting up points on the road. But they're really good at home, and Derrick Henry, it's actually amazing how much better he has been at home. That continues. So even though he did help you out in fantasy with those 2 short touchdowns in week 14, he was still really bad in terms of running. 34 yards and 17 carries, 2 yards a pop. He's averaging 96 yards per game on the ground at home and 7 touchdowns in 6 games. So going back at home is a good thing for Henry, but also going against the Texans, this is great timing because this Houston Texans offense that's going to go against Tennessee is going to be nothing like the offense we saw a couple weeks ago. Tank Della's gone. Nico Collins could be gone. CJ Stroud might not even play. If we get the Texans with Davis Mills and a bunch of backup wide receivers, I have a feeling that Tennessee will have the ball a lot. And so this is a great chance for Henry in neutral or positive game script to do what he does and run all over opposing defense. So I think Derrick Henry is one guy I have zero question. If I have him, I'm starting him this week. All right, Helso, you're going to roll with for sure week 15.
Yeah, you talked about that stunning loss, but I still think I like Jalen Waddle a lot this week. And you look on paper, you say, ooh, the Jets, tough matchup. But if you remember a couple weeks ago when they played the Jets, I said, hey, this is kind of a sneaky good spot for Jalen Waddle. What did he do? 8 catches, 114 yards in that game. And that was in New York. Now they get the Jets at home. Coming off, let's be honest, a pretty brutal loss against the Titans where they blew that lead late in the game. You got to think they're going to be fired up. They're going to play better. They're going to want to win this game. And this Jets defense, yes, they have a strong secondary. It's not a smash spot like Chris Olave versus the Giants. But they also have a guy named Sauce Gardner who's great against number 1 wide receivers, which is why number 2 wide receivers tend to do better. And I think that's what we're going to see here. Not to mention Tyreek Hill. He kind of left this game, came back, didn't play at the end, dealing with an ankle injury. He might not be 100%. They're going to need Jalen Waddle more in this game, and I think we see it in a sneaky good matchup against this Jets defense where he went for over 100 yards last time. I think they're going to need him. The offense has to be better this week. It just has to be better than it was last week. It was so bad last week. They've got to be better. Jalen Waddle's got to be a part of the game plan. I think Jalen Waddle, kind of surprisingly to a lot of people against the Jets, has a big game this week and helps teams advance to the semifinals.
They better come back this week. That's all I got to say. All right, my next pick. You know what? This feels a little bit like some low-hanging fruit, but I don't care. I'm going to take it anyways. I want to tell you that if you need a replacement at quarterback, you got some options. Some are going to be worse than you think, some are going to be even better than you know. So let's start with Matt Stafford. So I already said this in the waiver wire video. If you need to replace Justin Herbert, if you're still trying to replace Joe Burrow, or you're just playing the streaming game, you go from week to week and play a quarterback with a great matchup, it could not possibly get better than this. Stafford going against the Commanders. If for some reason you haven't been following the defensive stats or you don't realize how bad the Commanders' defense has been against opposing quarterbacks, let me remind you, this is the team that gives up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the entire season. They've actually gotten worse somehow because they traded away their two best defensive linemen before the deadline, if you recall. They've given up the most touchdowns to quarterbacks, and they've only gotten 6 interceptions. Now let's look at Stafford himself. He's coming off a game where he threw for 3 touchdowns and almost 300 yards against the Ravens, one of the best defenses in the league. And that's coming off the week before where he put up similar numbers against the Browns and their defense. He's got 10 touchdowns just in the last 3 games against really good defenses, and now he gets to face the worst pass defense in the NFL. It's almost too good to be true. It almost feels like a trap, but I'll fall into it. I don't care. I think Stafford really should be the highest scoring quarterback of the week, and I mean higher than a lot of guys that you would normally start. Yeah, Pat Mahomes has been struggling. Jalen Hurts hasn't looked right lately. I know it sounds a little bit hyperbolic to say that Stafford could outscore those guys, but he really could. Look, if nothing else, you want to stick with who you got at quarterback, that's fine. I get it. But I will say this, to not take the Matt Stafford pick'em on underdog right now, 233.5 passing yards, it's almost ludicrous because he should easily smash that in this matchup. I'm not even sure how it's so low. I'm taking that pick right now. I'm locking it in because these numbers can change as the week goes on, or sometimes they disappear. So if you haven't tried Underdog, this is a perfect time to do it. Again, sign up like I mentioned before. Make sure you use our promo code to get that deposit match and the free pick 'em. You pair it with this Stafford pick, and right there, you've got a winner. All right, your turn again. Who do you like to boom?
I love Rachaad White to boom this week. It almost feels unfair picking Rachaad White because this guy has been so good for so many consecutive weeks, and most people are probably just playing him. But I think this could be one of his best games of the season going against this Green Bay Packers defense. He's had 100 rushing yards in 2 of the last 3 games. He's gone over 100 total yards in 3 straight games. He's had at least 80 rushing yards in 3 straight games. Like, this was a guy early in the year we said, like, well, at least he catches passes, but now he's actually running the ball well. This running game has finally gotten going, and he's still catching passes. Oh, and you know what else? He's also scoring touchdowns. Now he gets a Packers defense bottom 10 against the run. Saquon Barkley, I mean, I know he's Saquon Barkley, but Saquon Barkley just had a fantastic game against him. No reason to think Rachaad White can't do the same. He gets almost every single touch here, gets all the carries, gets receiving work. Again, in a smash matchup this week, Rachaad White has been carrying your team, carried your team into the fantasy playoffs. I think he continues to carry your team into the semifinals and probably, honestly, all the way until the championship. But this week, especially, he should boom.
All right, let's go to another veteran player who, again, you feel like you always kind of want to have him in your lineup because of his upside. He's now finally starting to show that upside. I'm talking about DK Metcalf. Now, last week wasn't a great week for Metcalf. He did catch a semi-long touchdown, but then didn't do a whole lot. But let's remember, this was with Drew Lock at quarterback against the 49ers defense on the road. He still managed to come away with something at least, 52 yards and a touchdown. Now going against the Eagles defense, which has been, other than Washington, the worst against the wide receiver. Over the last 8 weeks, they have actually allowed the most fantasy points to that position. DK is a guy who you know can make big plays. This is the matchup he can do it. And, you know, I had to really look into this because we know what he did just a couple of weeks ago, that huge breakout game against Dallas. He had actually been really good in kind of a quiet way before then. He was getting 80 yards, 90 yards. He's starting to get more involved. It seems like this offense, his identity has been to just go to DK more. So I'm going to trust Metcalf in this matchup because it's almost too good to ignore. Could be another huge Metcalf game. All right, who else do you think has huge upside for this week?
I think Rashee Rice could finally boom. Look, he's been pretty good the last few weeks, at least 14 PPR points in 3 straight games. Scored a touchdown in a couple of those games, but he hasn't really had that big game yet. But I think this could be the week against the Patriots because this Chiefs team, for maybe the first time in a long time, kind of feels like they have their back against the walls. Like they need to win. And look, outside of Travis Kelce, Rashee Rice is really the only other pass catcher Patrick Mahomes seems to trust at all. He's always a threat near the goal line. He scored a touchdown. He also had another pass into the end zone that probably should have been a touchdown. Just, the connection wasn't quite there. But why I really like him this week in this matchup, you look at it, you say on the road, New England, not a great spot. New England plays the most man coverage of any defense in the NFL, and that's what Rice has had the most success against this year. He's been very good against man coverage. I think this is a defense Rice can exploit, and again, Mahomes needs somebody to step up. It can't just all be Travis Kelce. We know it's not Kadarius Toney. It's not Sky Moore. It's not MVS. It's got to be Rashee Rice this week, and I think he does. I think he comes through in a big way this week. I think he could have his highest yardage game, his most catches this year, and maybe he finds the end zone more than once this week. So I think Rashee Rice, if you've been rolling with him, keep rolling with him again this week. He should be great.
All right, my first couple of picks, I feel like a little too easy, really good players in really great spots. So let's try one a little riskier. This is still a really good player. DeAndre Swift has been a RB2, at some point was an RB1 for fantasy early in the season. Was really good, but what has happened lately? The last 2 weeks, this whole Eagles ground game and Swift especially has just not produced. But let's get some perspective here before we say, well, what has he done lately? How can you start Swift? Are you really going to trust him? Yeah, because what has happened with the Eagles the last 2 weeks, it just so happened they faced 2 of the best teams in the entire league, and they just didn't come through. I think the Eagles are just fine in terms of offense. I think they are going to continue to run the ball, and DeAndre Swift is a guy who will catch the ball also, and that's why I like him, especially in this matchup. Seattle is a team that is kind of, just been letting down defensively, started out strong, but they also, like the Eagles, have just let things go, and especially in the run game. This is a team that is now bottom 5 in terms of fantasy points per game to the running back, and over the past 4 weeks, 3rd highest yards per carry, almost 5 yards a pop for running backs against them. And also in terms of receiving to running backs, bottom 5 as well. They're giving up a lot of yards to running backs, both on the ground and in the air. DeAndre Swift isn't what you would call a workhorse, but are we really worried about Gainwell getting more touches here? Boston Scott is still Swift in the lead role. They know they have to feature him a little bit more. They're going to be able to in this matchup, especially if it is Drew Lock again, or maybe a banged up Geno Smith. Eagles will finally, I think, get to impose their will. This feels like a get-right game for them because they need to prove that they're still one of the dominant teams in the NFC. So I'm going to trust Swift. I'm keeping him locked in my lineups, and I think he could finally come back with another big game. All right, there you have it. Those are our boom picks for Week 15. Let's hope these guys go off and help you win in the playoffs and then keep advancing. If you didn't catch our start-sit advice at all positions for this week, check it out right here.